I don't feel it," said he. "I didn't mean that way. I heard what Dad said. When Dad allows he don't think the worse of any man, Dad's give himself away. He hates to be mistook in his judgments, too. Ho, ho! Once Dad has a judgment, he'd sooner dip his colours to the British than change it. I'm glad it's settled right end up. Dad's right when he says he can't take you back. It's all the livin' we make here fishin'. The men'll be back like sharks after a dead whale in half an hour." "What for?" said Harvey. "Supper, of course. Don't your stomach tell you? You've a heap to learn." "Guess I have," said Harvey dolefully, looking at the tangle of ropes and blocks overhead. "She's a daisy," said Dan, enthusiastically, misunderstanding the look. "Wait till our mainsail's bent and she walks home with all her salt wet. There's some work first, though." He pointed down into the darkness of the open main hatch between the two masts. "What's that for? It's all empty," said Harvey. "You and me and a few more have got to fill it," said Dan. "That's where the fish goes." "Alive?" said Harvey. "Well, no. They're supposed to be rather dead, and flat, and salt. There's 100 hogshead of salt in the bins, and we hain't more'n covered our dunnage to now." "Where are the fish, though?" "In the sea, they say. In the boats we pray," said Dan, quoting a fisherman's proverb. "You come in last night with about 40 of 'em." He pointed to a sort of wooden pen just in front of the quarter deck. "You and me, we'll sluice that out when we're through. Send we'll hev full pens to night. I've seen her down ha'af a foot with fish waitin' to clean, and we stood to the tables till we was splittin' ourselves instid o' them, we was so sleepy. Yes, they're comin' in now." Dan looked over the low bulwarks at half a dozen dories, rowing towards them over the shining, silky sea. "I've never seen the sea from so low down," said Harvey. "It's fine." The low sun made the water all purple and pinkish, with golden lights on the barrels of the long swells, and blue and green mackerel shades in the hollows. Each schooner in sight seemed to be pulling her dories toward her by invisible strings, and the little black figures in the tiny boats pulled like clockwork toys. "They've struck on good," said Dan, between his half-shut eyes. "Manuel hain't room for another fish. Low as a lily pad in still water, ain't he?" "Which is Manuel? I don't see how you can tell 'em 'way off, as you do." "Last boat to the south'ard. He fund you last night," said Dan, pointing. "Manuel rows Portugoosy, and you can't mistake him. East of him he's a heap better'n he rows is Pennsylvania, loaded with saleratus by the looks of him. East o' him see how pretty they string out all along with the humpy shoulders is Long Jack. He's a Galway man inhabitin' South Boston, where they all live mostly, and mostly them Galway men are good in a boat. North, away yonder you'll hear him tune up in a minute is Tom Platt. Man o' war's man he was on the old Ohio. First of our navy, he says, to go round the Horn. He never talks of much else, 'cep' when he sings, but he has fair fishin' luck. There, what did I tell you?" A melodious bellow stole across the water from the northern dory. Harvey heard something about somebody's hands and feet being cold, and then: "Bring forth the chart, the doleful chart. See where the mountains meet. The clouds are thick around their heads, the mists around their feet." "Full boat," said Dan, with a chuckle. "If he gives us 'O Captain,' it's toppin' full." The bellow continued: "And now to thee, O Capting, most earnestly I pray, That they shall never bury me in church or cloister gray." "Double game for Tom Platt. He'll tell you all about the old Ohio to morrow. See that blue dory behind him? He's my uncle, Dad's own brother, and if there's any bad luck loose on the Banks she'll fetch up agin Uncle Salters, sure. Look how tender he's rowin'. I'll lay my wage and share he's the only man stung up to day, and he's stung up good." "What'll sting him?" said Harvey, getting interested. Strawberries mostly. Pumpkins sometimes, and sometimes lemons and cucumbers. Yes, he's stung up from his elbows down. That man's luck perfectly paralyzin'. Now we'll take a hold of the tackles and h'ist 'em in. Is it true what you told me jest now, that you never done a hand's turn o' work in all your born life? Must feel kinder awful, don't it?" "I'm going to try to work anyway," Harvey replied stoutly. "Only it's all dead new." "Lay a hold of that tackle, then, behind you." Harvey grabbed at a rope and long iron hook dangling from one of the stays of the mainmast, while Dan pulled down another that ran from something he called a topping lift, as Manuel drew alongside in his loaded dory. The Portuguese smiled a brilliant smile that Harvey learned to know well later, and a short-handled fork began to throw fish into the pen on deck. 231, he shouted. "Give him the hook," said Dan, and Harvey ran it into Manuel's hands. He slipped it through a loop of rope at the dory's bow, caught Dan's tackle, hooked it to the stern becket, and clambered into the schooner. "Pull!" shouted Dan, and Harvey pulled, astonished to find how easily the dory rose. "Hold on she don't nest in the crosstrees." Dan laughed, and Harvey held on, for the boat lay in the air above his head. "Lower away!" Dan shouted, and as Harvey lowered, Dan swayed the light boat with one hand till it landed softly just behind the mainmast. "They don't weigh nothin' empty. That was right smart for a passenger. There's more trick to it in a seaway." "Ha, ha!" said Manuel, holding out a brown hand. "You are some pretty well now? This time last night the fish they fish for you. Now you fish for fish. Eh, what?" I'm ever so grateful," Harvey stammered, and his unfortunate hand stole to his pocket once more, but he remembered that he had no money to offer. When he knew Manuel better, the mere thought of the mistake he might have made would cover him with hot, uneasy blushes in his bunk. "There is no to be thankful for to me," said Manuel. "How shall I leave you drift all around the banks? Now you are a fishman, eh, what?" "Ooh! Ah!" He bent backward and forward stiffly from the hips to get the kinks out of himself. "I have not clean boat to day. Too busy. They struck on queek. Danny, my son, clean for me." Harvey moved forward at once. Here was something he could do for the man who had saved his life. Dan threw him a swab, and he leaned over the dory, mopping up the slime clumsily, but with great good will. "Hike out the foot-boards. They slide in them grooves," said Dan. "Swab 'em and lay 'em down. Never let a foot-board jam. You may want her bad some day. Here's Long Jack." A stream of glittering fish flew into the pen from a dory alongside. "Manuel, you take the tackle. I'll fix the tables. Harvey, clear Manuel's boat. Long Jack's nestin' on the top of her." Harvey looked up from his swabbing at the bottom of another dory just above his head. "Jest like the Injun puzzle boxes, ain't they?" said Dan as the one boat dropped into the other. "Takes to it like a duck to water," said Long Jack, a grizzly-chinned, long-lipped Galway man, bending to and fro exactly as Manuel had done. Disko in the cabin growled up the hatchway, and they could hear him suck his pencil. 149 and a half. Bad luck to ye, Discobolus," said Long Jack. "I'm murderin' myself to fill up your pockets. Slate it for a bad catch. The Portuguee has bait me." Whack came another dory alongside, and more fish shot into the pen. 203. Let's look at the passenger." The speaker was even larger than the Galway man, and his face was made curious by a purple cut running slantwise from his left eye to the right corner of his mouth. Not knowing what else to do, Harvey swabbed each dory as it came down, pulled out the foot-boards, and laid them in the bottom of the boat. "He's caught on good," said the scarred man, who was Tom Platt, watching him critically. "There are two ways of doing everything. One's fisher fashion, any end first and a slippery hitch over all, and the other's—" "What we did on the old Ohio,"
Dan interrupted, brushing into the knot of men with a